In this video, we're going to talk a little bit about how the condo rental process works in New York City. I'm Nick at Hauseit. Visit hauseit.com to learn how to save money if you're looking to buy, sell, or rent in New York City, Long Island, the Hudson Valley, or South Florida. So let's get started. So in this video, we're going to talk a little bit about how the condo rental process works here in New York City. You'll find this video to be useful both if you're a renter considering a condo unit or if you're a landlord looking to rent out your condo apartment for the first time. The first thing to think a little bit about is what condo ownership means with respect to board approval for a renter. As is the case with co-ops, in fact, condos also do have an application process and an approval process for tenants who are looking to rent in the building. Now, typically both condos and co-ops will have a rather extensive application which will be required for the tenant to submit prior to approval, and of course that means prior to moving in. Now, of course, in general, a co-op will probably ask for a few more things, but we've seen some pretty intense condo board applications here in New York City. So if you are a landlord and you're thinking about renting out your apartment, the first thing to do is contact your building's managing agent and request a copy of the sublet application. Sometimes they'll also call it the sublease application and so forth. So get that documentation and read through it and just make sure that you have a handle on the fees, the process, what's required, and the turnaround time. Now for a condo, usually the board has between 20 and 30 days as per the bylaws to review a prospective renter's application and issue what's called the waiver of the right of first refusal. This jargon or legalese is basically referring to the process when the condo, quote unquote, rubber stamps the tenant. And this is required, regardless of whether it's a small or a large condo building. Every building does have a procedure which you should definitely make sure you're following. Now that being said, sometimes smaller buildings, maybe self-managed buildings, are a lot more laissez-faire about it. But regardless, there really is some documentation for every building. So just make sure you're in touch with management, your board, your neighbors. Just try to do what everyone else has done. Try to follow the rules, because if you don't, and perhaps someone on the board doesn't like you, they might single you out and give you a hard time with your tenant. Now, if you are a tenant and you're thinking about renting a condo apartment, just be aware that for the reasons we've discussed, there is an approval process. And while in the case of a condo, there's not a meaningful risk of the application being rejected, you still may very well have to wait that full 20 or 30 days for approval. Therefore, you cannot necessarily move in right away. So, depending on when your move-in date is, if it's like 2 weeks from now, you basically can only consider rental buildings which are owned by one landlord. They usually have a much quicker approval process because there isn't that same condo board and bylaw type of structure. But of course, if your move-in date is 6 weeks from now or some reasonable time in the future, then a condo should be fine. You don't have a real high probability of being rejected or so forth, as is the case with the co-op. So just view the application process as being part of the cost of living in New York City. Like we said, condos, co-ops, they're starting to all really have really intense applications. So I wouldn't totally discount a condo if you are looking to rent something in the city. That being said, I would be very careful renting a co-op. That's not to say that your typical co-op is pretty efficient with the process. They are. The difference, though, with a co-op is that, of course, the board can reject the applicant who's put forth the application and put in all of that time and investment without any obligation to do something in exchange. And what we mean by that is, in the case of a condo, when they issue that quote-unquote waiver of right of first refusal, that means they're saying they don't want the building to actually rent the unit instead of you. So the condo could reject your application, but then they would have to actually rent the apartment for the same rental price that you've agreed with the landlord. That same obligation is not extended in the case of a co-op. Co-op can just reject you, and that's it. That's it. They don't have to do anything in exchange. It costs them very little to reject you. So, if you really are very focused on moving in and you don't want to have any unnecessary risk as a tenant in New York City, you definitely should not consider a co-op apartment. So now let's move forward a little bit. So, let's say that, you like the property and you want to submit an application. First of all, with a condo, you'd have to, of course, negotiate the terms with the landlord. So, if you have a tenant's agent, your agent would submit an offer to the landlord's agent, much as would be the case with a resale. So, you're going to submit your rental price, move-in dates, any other parameters you may have, if there's furniture, what furniture you'd like to remain, and so forth. So you need to have an accepted offer first, and thereafter, then you would actually go ahead and submit the condo application. Now, once the application is submitted for a condo, as we mentioned, typically they have 20 or 30 days to review. The good thing with the condo is if the condo board does not respond within the mandated time frame, most buildings' bylaws give you the right to essentially move forward. In other words, you're automatically approved. That is not the case with a co-op. So going back to co-ops real quick, you have a twofold risk. A, they could reject you, and or B, they could take a tremendous amount of time to review the application, thereby blowing past your desired move-in date. Now, once your application is approved, then you would be looking towards a move-in date. So make sure to check with the management of the building to find out what requirements they have for move-ins. You most likely have to register in advance for a particular date and time, and you'd also need to typically put forward insurance, standard type of insurance coverage for the mover who will be helping you out. And certainly on the day you move in, it's very important to do a thorough walkthrough of the apartment. This is especially acute because you are basically living in the apartment owned by a single person. That person could be a normal person, they could be an OCD person, they could be very laissez-faire, but you just don't know. So it's very important to make sure that you have copious amounts of photos and video to make an accurate reflection and record of what the apartment condition is at the time you move in. And that'll make it easier for you to get your security deposit back later down the line. If you are a landlord, we can help rent your apartment through our Hauseit rental listing service. To learn more, visit hauseit.com or give us a call, 888-494-8258. We hope this video was helpful, and of course, for any specific questions you may have, feel free to leave us a comment below. We've already given you our phone number, and you can also email us, team@hauseit.com. I'm Nick at Hauseit, and we'll see you on the next video.